In our classes earlier, we were looking at literary criticism and theory, and we tried to trace the background to literary criticism and theory. We looked at the classical criticism, medieval criticism. We focused attention on Plato, Aristotle, Sir Thomas Aquinas. We moved to Renaissance and neoclassical criticism from there, where we talked about Sir Philip Sidney and John Dryden. Now we come to Dr. Samuel Johnson's preface to Shakespeare. You're already familiar with Dr. Johnson. In the last class, I told you how Dr. Johnson called Dryden the father of English criticism. In this particular work, Preface to Shakespeare, which was published in Dr. Samuel Johnson, if you remember, is the person who wrote the Dictionary of the English Language. His views on Shakespearean drama are important for our study in this course on literary criticism and theory. As students of English literature, you're already familiar with Shakespeare, you're familiar with his poetry, you're familiar with his plays, you have studied King Lear in detail, where you also talked about Shakespearean drama. And in your course on English drama in the past, you have had a thorough understanding of the origin and development of drama, of Aristotelian concept of a tragedy, how Shakespeare differed. We have already talked about the pyramidal structure. We have looked at the 5-act construction, etc. Our focus now will be on Johnson's preface to Shakespeare and what are his views on Shakespearean drama, or what are the characteristics of Shakespearean drama. How is it different from the classical drama? As you all know, Shakespeare's plays are very famous for their complex characters, for the plot with the subplot, for very profound themes. We also know that the idea of the story is not original, but the presentation is original. Shakespearean plays explored human nature, love, power. Shakespeare uses iambic pentameter. We find extensive use of soliloquies and wordplay in his plays. Apart from this, we also notice that Shakespeare did not restrict himself to one genre. He did not write only tragedy. He did not write only comedy. He excelled at tragedies, comedies, tragicomedies, historical plays, romances. So we find Shakespeare covering the entire expanse of drama. While we were studying about drama in our earlier classes, we looked at the dramatic structure. How is a drama or a play structured? In a 5-act play, this is also the pyramidal structure. The structure of the play is generally like this. In Act 1, we have the exposition. The background information is given to us. The action starts rolling here. So we find the action in motion with the exposition that is presented in Act 1. In Act 2, we have the rising action. We find some complications happening in the main plot and the subplot. By the time we come to Act 3, we have the climax. This is the peak of the pyramid. Here, the main plot and the subplot come together. This is also the turning point. This is where the conflict reaches its peak. And this is the climax is where the main character's fate changes. Then from Acts 4 and 5, we have the falling action. In Act 4, we find the conflict that unravels itself, how the main character either wins or loses. So this is the falling action that one finds in Act 4. As the action falls further in Act 5, we find the catastrophe. This is the final disastrous outcome of the play. This is also the phase in the play, Act 5, where the conflict is resolved. Other characteristics of Shakespeare's play that you would all remember from your previous study. is that Shakespeare does not believe in the three unities of time, place, and action. He believes in the unity of character. We have the presence of the fool in his place, even in a tragedy like King Lear, which is supposed to be a tragedy revolved around a very serious theme, where our emotions of pity and fear uh, are purged. We find Shakespeare, while adhering to some uh, principles of Aristotle's tragedy, like the use of catharsis, the purgation of the emotions of pity and fear, the hamartia, the tragic flow in a the tragic flow that one finds in the main character, the rising action, the falling action, the exposition, the denouement, the climax, etc. All these are found in his plays. Apart from the main plot in Shakespeare's play, we also have the subplot. It is play within a play that we find. In Hamlet, there is a play within a play. In King Lear, there is a plot within a plot. So in most of his plays, you have more than one plot. As Dryden said in the Essay of Dramatic Poesy, it is not something that detracts us from the main plot. In fact, it helps in better understanding of the play. Most of Shakespeare's plays have a musical quality. They are written in verse form, but we also have passages written in prose. So we have a blend of prose and poetry. Generally, when the gentry, the common people, are presented in the plays, they are presented as using prose, whereas the elite, the kings, the rulers, the dukes, the duchess, use poetry. There is most of Shakespeare's lines drawn from his poems have become extremely famous worldwide. For example, if music be the food of love, play on. What's this is anyway not a play. What's in a name? That which we call a rose will smell just as sweet by any other name. Several such aphoristic statements are found in the works of Shakespeare. So to write an excellent answer on Shakespearean drama should not be difficult for you, based on your previous semesters, where you have in the history of English language and literature, we had studied about Elizabethan drama. We talked about Shakespeare's contribution to drama. In the course on English drama, we again studied Shakespeare. Then from there, when we moved specifically to a study of King Lear, we again looked at the different characteristics of Shakespearean drama. So this shouldn't be very difficult for you, but please, it is important. Anytime, in any course, we come to Shakespeare, remember, we cannot neglect it and move away. Edison, in one of his spectator papers, the number is given there on your screens, talks about true and falsehood. About Edison and Richard Steele, we have already had discussions when we were talking about the English essay in the previous semester. In the English essay, when we were talking about the origin and the development of the essay, we came to a phase where we were talking about the periodical essay. In this part of the course, we talked about the contribution of both Richard Steele and Edison to the periodical essays, how the periodical essays were didactic, how their intentions were to correct the follies of men and women using wit and humor, gentle wit and gentle humor. They did not use satire at all. You also had a specific essay, so Roger at the SEC prescribed for your study. This particular essay is prescribed in your course on literary criticism and theory for an understanding of what do we mean by true wit and false wit. About Wollstonecraft, Mary Wollstonecraft is famous for her work A Vindication of the Rights of Women, which was published in the year 1792. She is considered to be one of the proponents, in fact, one of the pioneers of feminist thought and criticism. Her argument is that women are not naturally inferior to men. In general, what people say is that this is very common even in today's society across the world. It is believed that man is superior to woman. But Mary Wollstonecraft does not believe in this. She does not agree to this. She says woman by nature is not inferior. People think she is inferior because of lack of education. This is one of the very important points laid down by Wollstonecraft. And look, this is late 18th century Britain. At this time, there is a woman writer who's talking about the educational backwardness of women of her own country. But the Western world today makes us believe that the third world countries are backward, are undeveloped or underdeveloped because we lack education, because the women in this society do not have rights to education. But their own society was not very different a couple of centuries ago. So her argument is that women are not actually inferior to men, but they appear to be inferior because women do not have access to education. She looks forward to a society where both men and women are treated as equal partners, as human beings who have the same thinking power. To reach this level, she feels that it is important that women or girls are allowed access to education, that we should have an educational system where women or girls have the same advantage as boys, so that by gaining education, she's not talking about women becoming a great leader, women holding a position of power. She's very simple and it reflects her society. She says that if girls gain education, if girls are given the same access to education, if girls can have the same advantage as boys in gaining education, then these girls will grow up to be women who will make very good wives, mothers, and workers. So for her, education still has certain limitations. There is not much we can say about Wollstonecraft at this point of time because a very limited primary text is prescribed for your study. After this, your course takes us to romantic criticism. Give me a moment, please. Again, this is something that you're already familiar with. Whether we read about the Romantic Age in the history of English literature, or whether we read about the Romantic movement in the English poetry, you are already by now familiar with what Romanticism, the Romantic Age, or the Romantic movement is. If you refer back to the earlier semesters, you will have the characteristics of the Romantic Age listed. Those same can be applied to the course here. Here we study specifically Wordsworth's preface to the lyrical ballads, and we have a discussion on Coleridge. Lyrical ballads, as you all know by now, is a joint publication by Wordsworth and Coleridge. Wordsworth and Coleridge had divided their work here. Coleridge was supposed to concentrate on the supernatural element, and we have essays like Kubla Khan, Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Wordsworth, on the other hand, dealt with more ordinary everyday life. The Romantic writers believed that literature or poetry is for everyone. It is not elitist. So they preferred to use ideas that are common to everyone. Their poetry or their works were written to express the thoughts and feelings of ordinary men and women in language that ordinary men and women could understand. So the diction is very simple. As we all know, Romantic Age is the age of strong belief in the power of nature. These are nature writers. These are writers who draw their imagery from nature. there is a lyrical quality. We find a lot of use of lyrics during this period because of the subjective element. The I is important in romantic literature, unlike the neoclassical literature. From here, uh, so about Wordsworth, about Romantic Age and the characteristics you are familiar, but something that is new for you is Dryden's, I think I jumped some slides. I need to go to Coleridge. The entire Biographia Literaria is not prescribed for your study. Only a small part is prescribed. Within that small part, what is more important for our understanding of Shakespeare's contribution to literary criticism are the three concepts presented on your screens: fancy, primary imagination, and secondary imagination. Let us try and understand what Coleridge means by imagination first, and how imagination can be divided into primary as well as secondary imagination. Uh, for Coleridge, please give me a second. There are only 2 more minutes for the class to end. If you can be a little patient, I will quickly maybe try to cover a little more by taking a few more minutes of your time. So what according to Coleridge is primary imagination? Primary imagination is something that is creative, that is original, and that is used unconsciously. It is the human individual power to produce imagination, to produce images, I'm sorry. It is the power to give chaos a certain order. I'll once again read the 3 points that we need to remember about primary education, primary imagination. It is creative, original, and used unconsciously. It represents the human power, the individual's power to produce images. It is the power that gives chaos a certain order. What is secondary imagination? It is the poetic faculty which not only gives shapes and order to a world, but also builds new worlds. When Coleridge talks about Gulfishaan, it is secondary imagination. It is a new world that he has built out of his imagination. What is fancy? For Coleridge, it is a kind of a logical faculty based on reason. It is the ability, the mechanical ability of the poet to use devices like figurative language such as metaphors, alliteration in poetry, so that the poet can blend various ingredients into beautiful images. In fancy, we find a poet making use of literary devices like metaphor, alliteration, etc., to create beautiful images. This is the mechanical ability that a poet possesses. The slides have again jumped a little. This we've already discussed. I think in rearranging, they got jumbled. It doesn't matter. I'll quickly give a brief reference to Victorian criticism. Again, this is not something that is very new. In the history of English literature, we have already covered the Victorian age and Victorian criticism. When we were studying individual writers of the Victorian age, whether in poetry, for example, we talked about Browning, we talked about Tennyson, we talked about Matthew Arnold in the past, in the earlier essays. So you've already been exposed to Victorian criticism. This was the age of the conflict between science and religion. We have writers like Arnold, we have writers like Tennyson bemoaning the loss of sense of faith and religion, and how science appears to be creating a rift in society. This is the major thrust of the Victorian age. I think, give me a second, please.